Everyone's very welcome. We're going to get started very soon, just giving everybody a minute to get into the room, and it would be great if everybody put themselves on mute. Thanks a million. We can probably get started, Mary, if you want to get going.
Okay, just to welcome everybody today, and for any of you that are in Kilkenny, it's probably the best place to be today, I think, based on the weather. Rowena, you're going to introduce the agenda for the day. Yeah, okay. So some of you will have come to our previous Wednesday weeklies. This is part of a 7-week series of sessions that we're doing around various topics to support artists. I suppose at the moment in particular, it's, due to COVID, there are more and more challenges for people, but I also think that I felt that success in funding applications is something that people really strive towards, and it's something, I suppose there's lots of new funding opportunities out there. So this was something that came up again and again at the, it has come up at the Wednesday weeklies, but also for us as funders looking at funding applications, there are certain generic ways and things that we would advise people to do. So Rowena Neville from Blue Line Consulting is going to facilitate the session. I'll let her introduce the event, and then I'm going to come back in and talk about funding opportunities in Kilkenny. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary. Welcome, everybody. As Mary said, I'm in Wicklow and it's also raining here. I am Rowena Neville, and I work for an organisation called Blue Line Consulting, and I work with cultural organisations around the country on their sort of strategic intent and helping them to fulfil their ambitions and their dreams. I'm not going to assume that everybody on the call can see me, so I'm going to give you a visual description of myself in case there's anybody with low vision or blind. I'm a white woman in my late 40s with what used to be short dark hair, but it's pandemic grown now. I'm in a yellow room with some ephemera behind me, and I'm wearing a pink jumper and a colourful scarf. If anybody has any accommodations that they need to help them with this call, do put the information in the chat or send a kind of a private message to Deirdre, who's the co-host, and we'll do our best to facilitate that. The call is being recorded, so please keep yourself muted so that the audio is as clear as possible. And obviously the screen share is being kept just to our contributors today. We're delighted to have Pauline, Connell and Siobhan Armstrong, who have come as sort of experienced appliers to things to give us their learnings and their kind of top tips. So thank you to them for all the work that they've put into that. If you have any questions, rather than raising your hand, because we have nearly 100 people on the call, if you could just put your question into the chat and we'll get to it when we can, that would be great. What else do I have to say? We may have some councillors from Kilkenny on the call, and if so, thank you, councillors, for being with us, and you're very welcome. Okay, so I am going to hand over to Mary, who's going to give us a chat about the funding opportunities.
Hi, bear with me now while I screen share. It worked a few minutes ago, so let's hope it does now. Okay, it's done the same. So I'm assuming, well, never a good idea to assume. My name is Mary Butler. I'm the arts officer here with Kilkenny County Council. So I'm going to do a run through of the County Council funding opportunities particularly for this year, and also some that have yet to be confirmed for this year. And also I'll reference other, I suppose, areas and avenues for funding opportunities. So what I'm going to run through today is essentially our ArtsAct grants, our ArtLinks bursaries, the Creative Ireland grants, Crinne No grant, the Decade of Centenaries, and I'm also going to mention our residencies, mentoring and collaboration projects. Though these don't always have a kind of financial outgoing to a practitioner, they do have a financial value, and it's still an application process. So very similar, if not the same, specifics apply to those. So our Arts Act grant, basically in 2003, the Arts Act, which permits a local authority to provide financial assistance for the purpose of stimulating public interest in the arts, promoting knowledge and appreciation and practices of the arts, or improving standards. So who's eligible to apply for that? Groups and organisations and individuals promoting the arts across all art forms, to enable them to pursue their practice and to develop within their chosen disciplines and to deliver projects. So the sorts of projects we have funded through the Arts Act grants over the years would be artist exhibitions. We've had applications, successful applications to develop short films. Amateur dramatics would be quite a key part of this award, particularly for the amateur sector. The Arts Act grant is very specific to that. We've had artists apply for the creation for the creation of new work, community and participatory projects, both from our organisations and from individuals, literature projects, music and concerts, also things like the booking of studios to record new work for musicians. And then I'm going to move on to ArtLinks. So most of you, I hope, are familiar with ArtLinks, and any individual practitioners are registered with ArtLinks. So ArtLinks essentially supports the professional development of creative practitioners who are resident in the local authority administrative areas of Carlow, Kilkenny, Waterford and Wexford. So this is a regional project that Kilkenny have been involved in for over 15 years now. And the core of that programme, I suppose, at the moment really is our bursary programme. And the other way that we would support artists is through our social media. So we have a bursary programme, and then we highlight a select number of successful artists through social media. So we actually profile artists and their projects that they've undertaken with the funding they received from ArtLinks. So we've two categories for bursaries through ArtLinks. One is for emerging and professional artists, because when you register with ArtLinks, you register as either an emerging artist or a professional artist. And we also have a collaboration award that's only in its second year now. So these awards are designed to assist artists to develop their practice. You can see there we mentioned travel and training, mentorship. We also assist with education at graduate level, and any projects looking for funding must identify a benefit to practice development. So this is very much back to where the Arts Office places the practitioner and the artist, which is at the core of the work that we do. We're also very strong in community programs, but the intrinsic value of the arts and the artist will also always be at the core of what we deliver, because without that, the quality of the community programs that we're in a position to run may suffer, because it's really about supporting that artist and their own practice in order to support them in developing their work so they can then successfully work with communities. So the types of projects, like I mentioned, we've had mentoring, we've supported third level education, continuing professional development, research and development of new work, album recordings, short run CPD courses and workshops, and residencies. So all of the above, you can see, supports the professional development of the practitioner in its own right. So the collaboration awards, like I said, this is just in its second year. So we're really looking to encourage more collaboration between artists across the 4 ArtLinks counties. We're looking to support artists to expand their practice, but also their networks regionally. And we ask for the collaboration to be between artists from 2 or more of the ArtLinks counties, and it must be the development of new work. And that new work then needs to be showcased in 2 or more of the Art Links counties at the end. And the total value of that award is 10,000. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Creative Ireland grants now. Creative Ireland has been around, well, next year is the 5th year. So essentially, a lot of Creative Ireland money is administered through the local authorities and managed by the local authorities. So that's nationwide. So our creative part of that money goes into Creative Ireland grants. So we look to support arts practitioners and those involved in the arts, in culture, and also heritage projects as well. So that's the thing, I suppose, about Creative Ireland, is that it has broadened out beyond the arts, and it's much more about culture and heritage projects, and very, very much about well-being as well. So we're really looking to encourage and enhance artistic and cultural participation throughout Kilkenny, and the grants lean back towards pillar 2 of the Creative Ireland strategy, which is enabling creativity in every community. And as part of the Creative Ireland grants this year, we also administered a grant for Connell Nog. So Connell Nog, as you know, is the National Day of Free Creativity for children up to the age of 18 years of age, and part of the Creative Ireland programme. And that's an annual celebration every year. The Decade of Centenaries is an interesting one. The Decade of Centenaries looks for applications from heritage societies, local historians, communities and artists who wish to commemorate events which happened in Kilkenny in 1921. And what I find really interesting about this is the Decade of Centenaries funding doesn't come from an arts organisation. And this is the first year that they looked specifically for projects that were developed by artists and creative practitioners across all art forms. But that they still commemorated, celebrated, highlighted or unearthed aspects of events that happened in Kilkenny in 1921. And the Decade of Centenaries isn't the only funder. The department that run the Decade of Centenaries, they're not the only funders looking to engage with the arts. And I think really that has been down to COVID, that I think really the arts can, I suppose, just connect with people so much more on an emotional level. And I think finally, the potential for working through things by way of arts practice is really coming to the fore. Again, projects within this fund needed to be community focused and to maximise community engagement. And I suppose before I move on from that, Creative Ireland also, if you look at some of their other grants, they have a climate awareness grant at the moment, which again is very much focused on climate awareness. They're very much looking at behavioural change, projects that encourage behavioural change. But again, there's a really strong arts aspect to that fund as well. So residencies and mentoring, like I said, these don't, allocate monies directly to the artist. We actually pay the centres where the residencies take place, but we annually administer a Tyrone Guthrie annual award and the Moth. Now, again, the Moth isn't happening this year because of COVID. The Moth is specifically for emerging writers. It includes playwrights and songwriters, and the Tyrone Guthrie is for artists across any art form, and it's an incredible place to go and do a residency. I do believe their new director is reviewing that application at the moment, but it's a wonderful opportunity. The Arts Office itself has a strong literary mentoring programme this year across poetry and fiction, but we're also involved year on year in various partnership and collaborative projects. So Platform 31 was an opportunity that, for the first time ever, a partnership between all local authority arts offices across the country and a partnership with the Arts Council of Ireland. It was for emerging artists, and it's very much around mentoring, peer support, and the financial allocation as well. Creation 21 is a partnership between Carlow Arts Office, Carlow Arts Festival, Dublin Dance Festival, a number of arts officers in the region, namely Carlow, Wexford, Waterford, Kildare, there may be others, and it's got an international aspect to it. And again, that is around mentoring and peer support for performing artists, specifically around spectacle and theatre. And the Four Rivers is another partnership between ourselves, Waterford and Wexford, which again is offered mentoring in theatre, but across directing, lighting, stage management, etc. So they're all application based, which is why I included them. And also, I suppose, just to talk about funding in general, I think it's always really important for people to remember that it will always be a competitive process. There will always be more funding or more opportunities looked for than we have the capacity to meet. So your priority really as an applicant is that you instill absolute confidence in the panel that you can and will see your project through to successful fruition, that you have the capacity to run it, you have the capacity to run it well, and the capacity to evaluate it and actually feed back to your funders the success of your project, or indeed the failings, but how you have evaluated those and how they've met the criteria of the funding. So finally, Kilkenny County Council does put together a grants booklet on an annual basis. It's a physical copy and it's also available online. So within that, there is also an events and festival scheme. Usually there's been no deadline given for that yet, but I would always go back, particularly at the moment, to also advise you to look outside of strictly arts funding and look at where your project may fit in, with heritage, with culture, with social inclusion, celebrating place, particularly at the moment because there's so much focus on the outdoors. I think that's it for me. I'm sure lots of things will come up as we go through the session this morning, but that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. One thing I did want to say is if you just stop sharing your screen at the top there.
Yeah.
Thank you. We will take a comfort break around the hour, depending on where the break is between speakers, because obviously, again, just in terms of accessibility accommodations, people might need a little bit of headspace or a run to the loo or to put the kettle on or whatever. So we'll take kind of 3 to 5 minute break then. So now it's going to let me move from slide to slide, hopefully. No, there we go. So thanks a million, Mary, for going through all of those grants. If there's a slide that you like the look of or you need to record some information, do screen grab, but we can also make slides potentially available. But I'm not sure if all of our speakers will have shareable slides. So look, hopefully you can see all of this, but I think what's really important is just this notion of getting to understand, reflecting on what Mary said, who your funder is, what their ambitions are, and what it is they need. Because at the end of the day, this isn't free money. They are using this money, they're spending their resources to get some sort of a return. And it's important that you understand what that return is that they need, and to speak to that in your application, because obviously the people who are reading the application have a set of criteria, and within that will be what it is they're looking for in terms of return. So I would advise you to read the grant criteria, the guidelines, the objectives, because the form itself will possibly only be one piece of the information. There'll usually be another document or somewhere else where you can read all the criteria and the guidelines of how to apply. And the main thing to know is that pretty much every fund now has an understanding that if you don't reach a certain level of eligibility, your application will be set aside and not considered. So it isn't a case of, oh, well, they know me. Even if I forget to put that bit in, sure, somebody will say it in the room. The chances are the people who are reading the applications won't know you, because people are brought in for these processes to ensure that they're transparent and they're independent. So make sure you've read what it is they don't fund. Don't ask for something to do with a building if they don't fund capital things. Don't look to fly to America to do a course if they don't do CPD or capacity building or travel. So does your idea fit with their themes and criteria? And back to my first point about ensuring that you know what their kind of higher level strategic aims are. I would always encourage someone to look at, in the case of Kilkenny County Council, what's their strategic plan or their corporate plan. You'll get it off their website. And if they've listed that, you know, I don't know, say happy communities, sustainability and community development are three of their big overarching plans. Well, I'd be making sure to mention some of those things if your project you think will help with that. Look at the arts plan, that should be available on kind of Mary's section of the website in terms of the Arts Office. Look at the other policies of the funder. The Arts Councils particularly have a number of policies that they expect applicants to adhere to. That's kind of the paying the artist policy. They have the equality, human rights and diversity strategy is really important to them at the moment. So it's important that you understand what are the things that they're going to be looking for. And how can you reflect their strategic intent in what you're proposing and show that you have aligned values? Have a bit of a read or a bit of an investigation about how it is decided. Do the council, you know, is it a decision that councillors make? Is it a decision that is an independent jury panel? And then how can I ensure that this audience will understand my project and work? And be aware of the more stringent criteria and less wriggle room. As I was saying, applications will be found ineligible if they are, or if you haven't completed all the questions or all the information. Certainly in terms of the Kilkenny, the arts grants and the arts links, you need to show that you have an association and a connection with Kilkenny. So, and that's particularly as well if the people in the Arts Office don't know you. So, and then identify any anticipated risks and whether you can treat, terminate or tolerate them. And I think that's really important. If you're making some grand plan and the people reading it going, oh my God, there's no way, you know, one person can push a tractor up a hill, whatever the thing is, you need to be able to show that you've thought about those things and how you're going to mitigate them. So are you going to treat that risk? Are you going to get rid of it altogether? We're not going to have a tractor, or we can tolerate it because we'll have we can treat it. We'll have 100 people rather than one person. We'll terminate it. We won't use a tractor. We'll use something lighter, or we can tolerate it because actually what's interesting is what happens next. That's part of the art process. Random idea. Sorry, it just came into my head, but it may not be relevant to you. And I think it's really important that you show you have the capacity to deliver or execute. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Pauline O'Connell. Pauline is a visual artist, sometimes curator and educator based in rural County Kilkenny, but she's also based part-time in Amsterdam, obviously not at the moment, but pre and post-COVID, hopefully. Pauline studied fine art, mixed media and at Dún Laoghaire Institute of Art and Design and Technology. And she received an MA in Social Practice and Creative Environment at Limerick School of Art and Design. She's currently completing a PhD at the University of Amsterdam School of Heritage, Memory and Material Culture, where her practice-led auto-ethnographic research uses a range of media, including sound, video, photography, drawing, installation and text. Quite the gamut, and she focuses on post-rural identity. And like most visual artists, much of Pauline's year is probably spent completing funding applications. So she has honed her practice in that area, and you can see her work at paulineoconnell.com. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to introduce Pauline. Thank you.
No, thanks, Rowena. I can kind of see myself and I see some familiar faces. So I only have 10 minutes, so I'll sort of do a speed talk through how I approach it. Firstly, when Mary sent me the email about this, I read the first line. I said, oh, I'd love to participate in that. And I read down further and I said, oh, she's asking me to talk at it. And I was like, well, I don't have the golden ticket. There's no such thing as a 100% success rate. And I felt really awkward. And I said, can I come back to you tomorrow? I suppose what I have and can bring to the table is brutal honesty. And I was quite shocked at, going through the last few years, an account of how many proposals I've written. So for instance, 5 this year, 1 just before Christmas. So, and I got the result this year. So successful on 2, not successful on 1, and I'm waiting for 2. The previous year, I think 3, and I didn't get 3. I could go on and, 8 out of 9 or 1 out of 9. So, I suppose I'm not exactly a slave to proposal writing, but I've honed it, and there's different approaches for each one. So I've slightly devised just mechanisms for myself to have at the ready. Ideas change and all the time, but I would say, having a sculpture training initially, I would have been quite successful in making public art commissions, present for art. And it wasn't that I, became arrogant about it. I didn't presume it, but projects were taking more than a year, up to 2 years. I was embedded in particular rural contexts. I engaged with many people before it was called socially engaged practice. It was messy, which is an academic term, but it was messy. It wasn't straightforward, and it was very hard to represent those projects. So over time, I think following the success of a few different public art commissions, I was shortlisted for 4, and I questioned at that point in the early 2000s, was I making the shoe to fit the foot? So I stopped making proposals for quite a long time, 4 or 5 years. Obviously, the lure of funding to enable any artist to make work is great, but I was teaching, I was curating, I was doing. My fingers were in many pies. So I actually self-funded a lot of projects. So I'm quite independent in that regard, and I don't rely on funding to make work, even though it helps me make better work, I would say. So I just want to talk kind of about a structure as to what makes it a little easier for me in how I just have 3 slides. So I'm going to share and then unshare at 3 different occasions. So I'll share now. So share. Okay, I really like a nice clean desktop. Here, now I'm in the way here. I'm talking to people in their own respective rooms who have a wealth of knowledge. So this isn't coming from a place of I know better. But I sort of have stacked these Russian dolls, basically, to have at the ready. So each year I sort of create a folder of what happened in that year and projects I'm working on, admin. And it's with regard to the admin folder, I have a bio and a statement and a CV. And I've, documentation going back over the years. It's in JPEG, PDF and TIFF files, miscellaneous, and proposal writing. I have different tips that I sort of remind myself about. An artist statement, a biography. I have an academic CV, which is a little over 5 pages and necessary. Let's say if I was looking for teaching, they don't have a limit, but for artistic proposals, there's a limit of 3 pages. So I think Rowena is going to deal with structuring a CV, so I won't really go into that. But that has really helped me, and to have that at the ready. So inevitably, you're writing a proposal, or we all are writing a proposal, and something goes wrong. It could be rural broadband, it could be many things. And just to know that those files are there, I'll just stop this now, and are there ready to go, and they need readjusting and reassembling. But the first thing I do is to see, am I eligible for the grant? So I look at the criteria, whatever proposal, whatever opportunity is available. Currently, the Arts Council don't fund postgrads, so I'm doing a PhD. So I have not applied to the Arts Council for a number of years since I started the PhD, because I wouldn't be eligible. I've applied to county councils and Kilkenny County Council and for various residencies, and then to be part of programs in certain universities. So I tend to be word heavy, but that's why I try to correct myself every so often. So I read whatever opportunity there is, I highlight what they want from a structural point of view. Is it 100 words? Is it 1,000 words? And I might do that in yellow. These are just my own tips. And then I go, well, what else do they want? And I'll read it again. And I might leave it mull in my mind overnight and say, okay, these are key things, and I'd highlight them in red or pink or something like that. And is it a theme, a place? What are those key aspects? And then I write a first draft. So inevitably, it's a bit like Freud's talking cure. It's a writing cure. I have to get it all out first. And generally, I found over the years, my last sentence is the synopsis, and it kind of economizes the whole idea. So I shift the bottom sentence or the last sentence of a paragraph to the front, because you have to give a synopsis for many proposals. And that works well. So I sort of do a second pass using simple language. It's not to say that the reader or the assessment panel won't understand it, but for my practice, it's interdisciplinary. So, I have sociology language from that, and ethnography as well. And, so I just want to make it clear, I suppose, from, what I want to do. So because I deal with many people, it's not a straightforward exhibition in a gallery per se. So I already have groups I've set up, or community groups that I work with, or individuals. So with regard to making a proposal that involves working with other people, I have already discussed this in advance with those I work with. It might be one person, or it might be, a large group. And in the collaborative nature of putting a proposal together, I would always identify who I'd be working with and what methods I'd use as well. I'm going to share my screen again.
Just to say, you're 5 minutes, Pauline, but we're not under pressure for time, so don't stress.
Okay. Share. I sort of structured it in such a way. Let me see there. Oh, sorry, that was just a screen grab. When I'm writing, I sort of made up this dummy proposal structure for myself. And I sort of remind myself that, am I a dummy? I have to check it every so often. But it is a sort of a structure that whatever I've written, I can then clarify whether I've met my objectives. So these are different from aims. Everyone has aims and ambitions. These are measurable outcomes. And they would help, let's say, work in tandem with what methods I'd use, whether it's working with other people or not, with regard to social practice. So the methods would be the specific activities, how I would do them, a detailed description of what will occur, and a timeline as well for that. When, so there are certain parameters on certain proposals. It has, like the Decade of Centenaries, has to culminate in October or something like that. So obviously you have your own timeline there. And the Arts Council too, it's within 1 calendar year, or from when they give the grant. So when, obviously, and the order of the tasks. So I suppose from the administrative point of view, or the funding point of view, the timing and looking at the order of tasks would show them how capable you are. You don't start by writing the press release, in other words. And it's always quite futuristic. And I suppose that's the most difficult thing I find with writing proposals. It's always futuristic. And then when you either get a rejection, or, those ideas don't die, that they still remain. They might come out at a different stage, but it is disheartening at the same time. It really is. The timetable tells the reader when, and provides another summary of the projects. So there are sort of little tricks as to how you can sort of, say it again, maybe synopsize. I think someone has the sound on. So why the planned work will lead to the certain outcomes you might anticipate. So I think somebody used the word happy earlier. I don't think it's the artist's role to make people happy. I think that's massive expectation. There are subjectivities within that. And in many respects, you know, those outcomes can be mooted, but they can't be guaranteed. I think that's the difficult thing when you're working with people. And that's what makes it interesting. And I think it was Susan Hiller had said, for the artist to accomplish a proposal into fruition and to surprise themselves, that's when creativity is at its best, something along those lines. So your methods section would convince the reader that you know what you're doing effectively. I would say the staffing and administration, when you're working with people, from my perspective anyway, is the most difficult. You're trying to bring people on board. People are going, oh, really? You want us to make an art project and it's tug of war? It's not that I want to educate people, but to I suppose build stakeholders, and that's what I do, because my field site is around where I live. It's on top of a hill. It's quite specific. And the politics around living in the rural, that's what I center on. So administering the project is I would say, in tandem with bringing people on board and developing it. And developing it could actually take half the time if you had a year, and projects generally for me take a year to 2 years. Evaluation is, for me, ongoing. It's formative. You're always questioning what the process is, who's involved, who's not involved, and you're following best practice, which I suppose if you keep questioning yourself along the way, that hopefully that will be achieved. But over years of experience, I think that is the questioning of who's involved, and that every stakeholder will have a say. And I've worked in inner city schools with children in Dublin for years and years and years when I lived there. And in no uncertain terms, the children will tell you if it's rubbish. And it's very honest and it's very true. So to create that space is fantastic. I love it. And it's not that, let's say when I work with farmers, I'm trying to go, art, it's wonderful, it's for everyone. You have to go to a gallery to consume it. We also create art. We don't just consume it, and we don't have to go somewhere else to consume it. I think that's the main thing. And I would say, I'm going to unshare now, and there's just one more slide, and I know I'm probably running slightly over. With regard to documentation. So the last slide I just showed, or PDF, is just my own checking list. Have I said this? Have I said that? And sometimes that structure changes, but having those components is really quite important. With regard to documentation, because of COVID and I would say the embedding of a proposal into the one PDF has been tremendously beneficial for me in my practice, because looking at one image in isolation never represents me or a project. I need 3 or 4, and I need a bit of text, I need a context. So I'll just share something here to might demonstrate that. Come out of that here. So effectively, I think, you know, for art links, for instance, there's a formatted proposal sheet. There are problems with those formats because it's very hard to break them and re-enter them when you're amalgamating them together. But it does ask then that you have your CV, for instance, embedded, and then you follow through with what I have here is a list of documentation. So I'll just sort of go through it. So what I call page 1, but of course it jumps around, describes what I'm going to show in images. And I have hyperlinks. So this is the sneaky way to sort of reference other people who written about the work, other publications, And if one was inclined, you can go off and just see what else is said about it. So effectively, on the left is the list of supporting documentation, good images, and a slight little synopsis at the top. What it is, it's a 3-channel HTV, and then it's an installation shot. So it has to be very descriptive, otherwise people don't know what they're looking at. And for me, sometimes they're quite abstract images. So let's say the first image is the first project. The second page, these 3 images stacked, is the same project. I'll just make it a little smaller. So in other words, I need 4 images to represent that project. And having it in the PDF is just fantastic, because you're not looking at those images in isolation. And there is a slight little description. So the name of it, year, it's a HD video composite image, for instance. So it's the Ronseal approach. Sorry, I'll make it a little bigger. It's the Ronseal approach. It does what it says on the tin. Then on the page here, the milk well and the tea well, it's another project. And there's just 2 images. They don't exactly represent it. There are hyperlinks here, here, and here. And there's a slight synopsis. It was part of a research residency at the Leitrim Sculpture Centre, which effectively I wrote a proposal for as well. And it was linked with a thematic art and agriculture. So I found myself in Manorhamilton for a period of 6 weeks. And it's a really fantastic place, like a New York style gallery. You have a show at the end of it, and it's funded, which is amazing. So they hint at it, at what the project might be about. Obviously, milk is in the title. Here on the left, it's a project from 2012, and I'd never go further back than 10 years and generally try to keep it within 5 years. But the trouble for me is a project could take 2 to 3 years, so I'd only show through 2 projects. So it wouldn't be enough, let's say, to represent the practice. So that's why I kind of always start perhaps with Drawing the Water on the right. It's a public art commission as well. The last public art commission I did in Kerry, I did the sort of what I call the Bermuda Triangle. I travelled from Kilkenny to Milltown, County Kerry. I was doing a master's in Limerick at the same time, and back again. So I want to wind it up here. And that's it. So that's really about documentation. There'll be many questions in the chat, perhaps about success and failure, which I can answer, but I've run out of time now. But I'll end on this. One question I ask myself at the end of everything, what would I do differently if I were to do it again? After teaching, after whatever. Sometimes the answer is nothing. And sometimes is, oh, I didn't really address this, or I didn't address that. So it's a very healthy question to constantly ask yourself. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Deirdre. Rowena.
Thanks a million. Well, that was really useful, and thanks so much for giving us a sneak view of your process. Very jealous of your filing system and how clear everything is. Very impressive. And the other thing I thought was really interesting was each of your images that you've saved them in 3 formats, JPEG, PDF, TIFF. That's a great process because you never know which version somebody's going to ask you for at the last second to have them already prepared. And I liked your approach in terms of when you get the application, highlighting the structure, looking at the word count, figuring out what they want in each question. And this notion of the first draft, the writing cure, that made me smile. Just get it down, get it out of you, and then you can edit and re-edit over your weeks and days and how much time you have to do it. And I really liked that you made it really clear about the evaluation, that building that into the project at the start, that this is not something you think about afterwards and go, oh God, what will I tell them? That's really important, and we'll talk again a little bit about that. And I didn't, so that's really interesting then. Of course, academic CV, it's the longer version, 5 pages, art CV, shorter, no more than 3. And then, of course, always having a biog on hand. So when I am preparing for a grant round, I'm thinking, first thing I do is to set down and create a calendar. I mark the key dates in my diary. I want to have the first draft done, or I want to have at least question 1 and 2 done by this date. And this is when I need to be reaching out to my stakeholders, all that kind of stuff. Worth considering, is it useful or appropriate to have a discussion and to reach out to the arts officer in advance, or the somebody has their microphone off on. Deirdre, I don't know if you can deal with that for us. Thanks. So third thing, research. What do I need to know that I don't know? So I have as much time as possible to find out. Are there stakeholders I need to talk to? Because obviously the earlier the better, particularly if you're looking for them to write you a letter. Do not contact the arts office on the morning of the closing day to say, could you just write me a letter to say I need this thing, because you don't know that they're in the office, or that they haven't taken the week off, or, you know, are out sick. So make sure anybody who needs to give you any kind of supporting documentation, or even agree to support it or to lend you a thing, make sure you do that well in advance. Map out the questions, as Pauline said, what information should go where. I think this is really important. I'm always fascinated when I read drafts of funding applications where nearly the same thing is said in answer to every question, but actually they've left out really important stuff. There is a word count, quite particularly on Arts Council applications. Don't waste words or characters on repetition. So decide on the most compelling way to say something, where it's most compelling to say it. And then, you know, if unless absolutely necessary, don't say it again. Develop a template for proposals, which I think Pauline talked about and does really well, and for biographies. But test it and amend it as you learn, because whether you achieve success or failure, really taken aback to hear in terms of a solo artist application that in some cases it's the success rate is 1 in 10 for Pauline. So that's really worth knowing, that there's graft involved in this, and sometimes you can take a pause on it and decide to take another direction in terms of how you're funding your projects. Develop a template, as I was saying. Collate and edit down your supplementary material to show your project and experience to a best light and concisely. So if it's a case that you can add various documents, don't create a tsunami of stuff for people to read. Sit down, edit, and if necessary, put it together in one document. And remember, those documents will have a maximum size. So if you don't know how to, go and talk to somebody, because when you create that PDF, if it's more than the 10 megabytes, certainly the Kilkenny Arts Office, it'll bounce into the ether, and it won't get through their firewall. So how do you reduce the size of images to make sure that PDF is small? Go and find someone who can help you with that kind of technical side and get them on your team for success. So this notion then, who else can you rely on to help your committee for success? I'm going to stop that share, and I'm going to introduce our second speaker. And we've heard from an individual artist, and that has a very specific focus in terms of the kinds of grants and the approach, but really useful because not all of you are individuals. Some of you are from organizations, or you're working with community groups. So really good to have that sort of group approach. So Siobhan Armstrong is a musician, a PhD researcher, educator, speaker, mentor, and arts administrator. She's one of Europe's foremost historical harpists, playing copies of harps from different centuries with singers, soloists, orchestras, and opera companies, and she does that at an international level. Siobhan is the founding director of the Historical Harp Society of Ireland, which spearheads the rediscovery of Ireland's ancient harp strung in brass wires. She has nearly 20 years of successfully attracting funding for her organisation at both County Council and Arts Council level. So this is going to be really valuable, and thank you in advance, Siobhan, for your contribution today.
Thank you very much, Rowena. Thanks to Mary and Kilkenny County Council Arts Office for inviting me, and to Rowena now for facilitating today's seminar. Yeah, I've been preparing funding proposals for about 19 years. mainly on behalf of the Historical Harp Society of Ireland, which I founded for my sins in 2002, but also on my own behalf. So I'll just hope to share some of what I've gleaned or gained along the way. Most of what I'm going to say is very practical, and I will be echoing some of what Pauline has already said and what some of Rowena has said, because there's, there are certain aspects that we have to keep in mind all the time, but they might bear repetition. The first thing I would say about the very practical stuff is, do not do a funding application at the last minute. It needs time, and especially if it's the first time you're applying for a particular project, or you're not very experienced at doing funding proposals, or even if you are very experienced, you need time to really think through calmly what you want funding for. You need to be, as Pauline said, you need to write drafts, and you need to look over them to see if they really articulate what you need them to. And so you need to do draft after draft. So, leave yourself time to do that. Check the closing date and time, and that's worth saying many times over. It might be 2 p.m. in the afternoon rather than 5 p.m. on the closing day. And I say this from bitter experience, because I once spent nearly a week doing a funding application for myself, and I missed it by 3 hours because I didn't notice that the closing time was a rather arbitrary 2 in the afternoon rather than 5 on a Friday. And the portal closed. It was an online application, and that was the end of that. So from bitter experience, I'll say check the day and the time. Start thinking about it weeks before, not days before. It can be a really daunting thing to do a funding application. So just tip away at it, just chip away at what it needs to contain and what supporting materials you need to add. All of that takes time, but just sort of get going at little corners of it that you can face. And then, one step after another, you'll get there. It's a process that needs to unfold as you're working your way through it. So for starters, I would echo what the others have said. Read the guidelines. Don't assume that you can wiggle past awkward parts of them. They are your Bible, and you have to follow them. And they're there to help you. So they'll give you structure. So it's a good thing to have a look at your guidelines and to take them very seriously. Now, your funding body, whoever they are, they want the info in a particular way for a particular reason. And you can't argue with that. You have to do it their way. Check out, as Rowena, I think, already said, check out what a funding stream will and won't fund. And you have to channel and funnel your ideas through whatever funding stream the county council or the arts council are offering. So check that the funding parameters and your project overlap very well indeed. And if they say they're not funding capital or equipment or general administration costs, or a proposal which doesn't have an appropriate objective like sport or recreation, then there is no point in hoping that they will buy you a printer, or, as Rowena says, that they will, pay for an air ticket to America or help the football team's great, wonderful project. So if you're applying, for example, under the Arts Act grant, then you need to show clearly how your project has intrinsic artistic worth. And the Arts Act guidelines are really clear in that regard. And they're very helpful. You should be developing a knowledge of the arts and the arts practice, your own and others. You need to be promoting the arts and arts practice to the public. So it's not something just for you. It has to have extrinsic value outside of you as well. And it should develop an appreciation of the arts and arts practice, your own and others. And it should hopefully assist in improving the standards of the arts generally and arts practice. The next thing I would say is brainstorm with colleagues. This is a one. Don't feel like, even if it's an individual project, don't sort of sit there and stew in your own juices. Brainstorm with other people. You'd be amazed how, or maybe you wouldn't be amazed, maybe you know this already, that just the talking back and forth really helps. It's a great collegial way to firm up a plan of what you want to accomplish and how. Pool ideas, thrash them out. Other people will find the weaknesses in what you think is your great plan. Make a better plan. Be humble, take everybody's ideas on board, and don't get stuck in your rut. Definitely make a realistic plan. Do not promise the skies. That's very tempting, is to sort of sex up your project so that it looks really wonderful. But be realistic. There are only so many hours in the day. You only have so much energy. Promise what you can actually produce. And that's good for your sanity, and it's good for the outcomes of the project. I would echo Pauline's wonderful system that she has on her desktop, and we do a similar thing at the HHSI. So the first thing we do is we use Google Docs. So if you're putting a project together with other people, consider using tools that will help you to work together in real time. So for anybody who hasn't used Google Docs, you do need to set up a Gmail account. But then you can go and you can set up what looks like a text or a Word document, but everybody is looking at the same document in real time. And as somebody else types in it, you can see the text appear. This is much better than sort of emailing things back and forth. You can do the same things with Google Sheets. So you can set up a spreadsheet for your budget, and you can all be looking at it. It's really handy also because you can look at it, when other people are asleep. Like, I'm a night owl, so I might be looking at it late at night. Other people on this team are very impressively the get up at 5 a.m. in the morning people. So they can be looking at it before I've woken up, but they can comment on it. You can comment on any word or section or sentence, and others then can reply to those comments. So it's a real-time document, and it's useful for working when you're not in tandem with other people. Try to share the work if at all possible. So you find out about this, I'll find a costing for that. That's another thing you can do in Google Docs, is you can assign tasks to people so that they know what they have to do. So that's a very efficient way to work, and it's very clear. And it's really worth taking a few minutes to set up a Gmail account to be able to do that. It's, as I say, also useful to set up a budget in Google Sheets so everyone can have a look at that if you think it's important. Clear articulation is vital when you're thinking about the writing, the thinking through it, and then the articulation of that writing. So again, I would echo what Pauline says: start a draft, and then you'll do iterations of that draft until you're really clear about what you're articulating. I would say again, read the application form, read the guidelines over and over. The Arts Council, for instance, give very good separate guidelines for their funding proposals. Kilkenny County Council, for example, gives a criteria sheet that you can read through. Make notes. I smiled when Pauline went through her method as an individual artist, and I find it's very similar for us as an organisation, that we'd read through the important points, and then I actually write those on the page where I copy and paste them onto the page where I'm writing my initial draft to make sure that I'm working towards those. So let them guide you, even for language. So to guide you, echo back the terms that are used. So we will fulfill the council's criteria as follows. The purpose for which the grant is sought is, the following people will benefit from the activity. So use the language that you're given to guide your thinking and your articulation of what you're proposing. And that'll keep you on track, and it'll keep you focused. Make a list of the supporting documentation and get to work on that early as well. And I think Rowena was just saying that. And I would second that heartily. So if you want to include, and she mentioned letters of support, and I will mention them as well. If you want to include letters of support, that is going to take time. The people you're asking to write them are undoubtedly busy people. So help them to help you. And don't, for example, make them write you a letter from scratch. That's a big disincentive to busy people. And you might not get what you want in time or at all. And it's not that they don't want to help you, but they're just very busy. So you help them to help you. Give the person a clear idea of what their letter needs to express. It could be something like, we're very interested in this project. We're keen to collaborate. This is what we can offer by way of support: a venue, funding, PR help. It could be that simple. If you give them that, they'll give it to you back. If you give them a sample text that they can tweak, it's much more likely that they will get you something appropriate in time for your application. And I wouldn't worry if you're getting lots of different letters of support. I wouldn't worry if the text is similar on each of them, because it's still articulating that somebody is going to collaborate with you. So it doesn't have to be a different novel for each person. Again, I would echo what Rowena has said with regard to supplementary materials. Pare it down and choose wisely. So follow the guidelines. If they say you can only give 3 examples of work, then take that seriously and don't make it bitty. And I loved what Pauline showed us in her beautiful representation of what she was uploading. And I would echo that as well. She gave us a great example of it. Make a PDF of a few photos on one page of your past work or your past event. No one wants to wade through reams of material. So have pity on the reviewers and be merciless with yourself about how much you include. Get your aims and objectives really clear in your own mind from day one. Because if you're not super clear on what you're trying to do and why, then a funding application assessor is probably also going to wind up feeling a bit hazy about what you're aiming to do. They are going to pick that up from your funding proposal. And again, if possible, don't do all this on your own. Brainstorm together if you're a group, or brainstorm with your supportive friend if you're an individual making a proposal, to get ideas together. If you find yourself like me, and I will freely admit this, if you find yourself dreading it and procrastinating, then maybe start working on bits of text that express the different parts of the application. So just start. You can edit and you can revise them in the future so they get better and better, but you just need to start somewhere. So start and just start getting words on a page. Again, I would echo what I think Pauline was telling us, that if you have, you'll have things that you'll need for each proposal. So the background to you or your group or your organization, your mission statement, your statement of interest, a summary of what you want to do, draft outline of the project, a detailed timetable of events, CVs, artist bios. Save all those things. You're going to use them again and again. You're unlikely to make only one funding proposal in your life. So if you put in the effort to do this once, keep it organized as Pauline does. Keep dedicated folders, or even just a box if you're not an online person and you're doing hard copy funding proposals. For me, I keep things in Dropbox, and you can have it as a starting point next time. So every funding proposal I do has its own file. So we have in Dropbox for each funding, we have a year. So 2021, we have all our funding proposals in that for county councils, for Arts Council, to other organisations. So keep them all lined up, and then you can refer to them year on year. You'll inevitably tweak and you'll make it better next year, and that's great. But don't start from scratch each time. Record your events as you go is another thing I would say. And take photos or take video shots so that you can show them in future funding proposals and in reports. So if you're fortunate enough to receive funding, a photo really does speak 1,000 words when you're reporting back at the end, and it helps for your next funding proposal. So a picture of smiling, happy local people involved in your project is very encouraging to the Arts Council or the County Council. It shows them that their money will have a real effect on the ground. Write in clear English. So make sure that it's clear and articulate, but if you're a sort of an academic person, don't fill it with sort of highfalutin academic speak. Find that sweet spot of that you're articulating your subject clearly, but that you're not talking over people's heads and you're not being too colloquial. Definitely type if at all. I'm sure nobody writes things nowadays, but make sure you type it. Keep to word counts. That's so hard if you don't have much experience. I found that very, very difficult when I started out 20 years ago to keep to word counts. It takes time to get good at what you want to say in only a small space. And the trick with that is to write what you think and then revise, as Pauline says, and Rowena said as well. And it takes time. So start the process early enough that you can do that. At the HHSI, we're currently working on 2 funding proposals this month for Arts Council funding streams. And one is actually due tomorrow, so I'll hopefully be uploading that later today. And that brings me to some of my final but important points. Do not leave submission until the last day. I will say that again and again. If you value your health and you just don't want to wind up in a coronary ambulance, please don't leave it until the last day. It always takes longer to upload than you think. Even for simple proposals, I had to upload a fairly simple funding proposal for myself a few months ago to the Arts Council online system. And I didn't have so much to upload. It still took me 3.5 hours because their system kept collapsing. Various things happened. And I thought, but sure, I'll have to, even after 20 years, I thought, Ash, this will take a half an hour. It doesn't. It takes hours and hours and hours to do it. So in case anything crops up, which puts you uncomfortably against that deadline, be careful. Your printer will run out of ink on the day that you're trying to print everything out. This is invariable. I have no idea why this happens, but it does every single time. Your car will break down as you're trying to drive over to Kilkenny County Council Arts Office. Web portals will crash when you're uploading. So be careful of all of those things. Proofread the application before you submit it. Get somebody else to proofread it as well. Make sure that the numbers add up in your budget. Double check that you're enclosing all the mandatory materials. Check again and again. BIOG, statement of interest, outlines of the projects. A separate budget, you can stretch that so that your proposed income and expenditure is crystal clear. Make a photocopy of your application if it's a hard copy. It's really handy in the future to be able to check back on what you've done in the past. Maybe make a contents list to help the council understand what's in the envelope. And it creates a good organized impression before they even turn the first page. Try not to resent funding proposals. They are a great way of making you get down to serious planning. So having to put together exactly what your project will look like and who's involved and artist biogs and timetables and a budget that you're going to have to stick to, it's great to get that sorted out in order to be able to apply for funding. And years ago, we might have half-heartedly put a funding proposal together thinking, sure, there's no point in really getting to grips with this until we know we have the funding. But then you wind up doing twice the work. So we've completely changed our minds on that. Really figure out what you will really do. And then you'll sell it so much better from a funding point of view. And then if the money materializes, you can hit the ground running because you know exactly what needs to be done. So I would say put in the effort from the start.
2 minutes, Siobhan.
Lovely. Okay. So budgets. How do we approach budgets? Tricky when you're starting out. We gain experience year on year. So the more often you do it, the more realistic you'll be about the costs. And this ties in with what I was suggesting earlier about being organized. You want to have past final budgets, not draft budgets, but the real final budgets that you used at your fingertips so you can get more accurate in draft budgets each year. Obviously, you need time to get quotes. That's like the letters of support. You need time to do that to figure out the costs. Start early. You could start by using the budget template you're given. You'll get more sophisticated as you go. Remember that your income and your expenditure have to match. So be realistic about your income. Have clear headings in your budget that tell the story of your project, the what and the how, and use subheadings for all the details. And I'll slowly come to an end. Methods of evaluation. Well, I don't need to talk much about this because others have. But how do you measure or describe the impact or outcomes of your event? You have quantitative and qualitative methods. So the quantitative are things like audience numbers, if you can measure them somehow, and ticket sales. Qualitative, if you have audience questionnaires that you can get people to fill in, or you have informal feedback or people send you emails afterwards, keep track of that stuff. And finally, I would say to you, practice makes perfect. Just keep at it. Keep at it. You'll get really good the more you do. Thanks very much.
Thanks a million, Siobhan. That was so useful. I was breaking out in hives when you were talking about checking the time and don't leave it till the last day. Yes, we could make everybody's eyes fall out of their head with the horror stories. But anyway, I once discovered about 3 hours before a deadline that I needed a commissioner for oaths to sign a document. And I'm in Wicklow. I never drove to Dublin so quick and to get somebody to sign, because I didn't know anybody in Wicklow, to sign a document. Yes, the apocryphal warnings are hopefully well heard. Great advice about Google Docs if you're working with a group in terms of a shared process. And absolutely, your budget points were really interesting in terms of telling the story in the budget. I know of some readers who go to the budget first, and if the budget doesn't make sense or they can't actually understand what the project is from the budget, they're already marking down mentally in their head before they start reading what the project is or the application. So make sure you give the budget some time. Okay, I make it 11:11 by my clock. So I'm just going to give everybody 4 minutes to gather themselves, just in case people need a little bit of quiet time. So can we come back here at 11:15 for our final bit? And you could also take the time to think if you have any questions and to pop them into the chat. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully we have everybody starting to come back. Thanks for sticking with us. And most importantly, thanks to our two brilliant speakers who gave us, I mean, it's interesting how many parallels there are in terms of approach, whether you're an individual, whether you're a community group or an organization. It is all about organization, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really useful to know what your strengths and weaknesses are and to create a sort of a committee of support or committee of success around you. Because actually, if you're not a brilliant writer, somebody you know probably is and can kind of help you. I'm somebody who collects words. If I'm reading something and I see a great word and I think, oh, that's a great word, I should use that in my stuff, and I'll write it down somewhere or put it up on a post-it. And I think that that's a really useful thing to do, because you might actually hear a word, you think that's a way better word to describe what I do than that other word I've been using, that I've been bumping up against forever. So that's a good thing. So I'm going to share my screen again, because I'm going to do some talking now, and hopefully we have everybody back. So both Siobhan and Pauline talked about this notion of the case for support and making it compelling. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. Again, just to remind you again that in most cases these days, it's now independent assessment panels. There was a time when it was kind of people you knew potentially who were in the room, and if you could kind of make an assumption that maybe if there was something that wasn't included, that they'd speak up for you in the room, and that's not necessarily possible now. Pauline, can you have a look, or it's not Pauline, sorry, Deirdre, and just check who has their microphone on, and just mute them first, because I'm getting a bit of feedback here, and just in case it's coming through on the recording. Thanks a million. So make an assumption that the readers have no prior knowledge. And if you're somebody who has been funded year in, year out from the Arts Council, or sorry, from the Arts Office, remember that every year there's potentially more people going for that fund. It is a finite amount of money. And it there may be more people in the pot. So you can't make an assumption that if you've been funded before, you're going to be funded again. So every year, try and make your text and your copy a little bit more compelling. So ensure you answer everything that's required. That came up a few times. I kind of approach these things like the Leaving Cert question, that I make sure that whatever they've asked in the question is somehow turning up in the answer. And then, write your first draft and test it. Is the language that you're using, or the approach that you're taking, whether that's first person or passive language or active language, like what's the thing that makes people keep reading? So test it and ask people to read. And then indicate clearly if there's policies or legislation or rules that you're supposed to be adhering to. Mention in the text that you are aware of it and that you are adhering to it. So whether, for instance, child protection or the paying the artist, health and safety. I referred to EHRD earlier. This is the Equality, Human Rights and Diversity Strategy of the Arts Council. So if you're applying to the Arts Council, you absolutely have to be adhering to that. So these are things that are worth reading. Download them and put them in a document someday to read. Have you expressed the tangible benefits to the funder and to the community? So again, this is this return on investment, and return on investment doesn't have to be economic. It can be about community development. It can be about engagement. It can be about positive feeling. It can be about engagement. What are the benefits to the funder or to the community? And have you demonstrated your capacity to successfully plan and execute? And you can demonstrate that capacity by talking about past projects, and again, showing that you've identified what the risks are that we talked about earlier on, and that you've considered them. So the timeline for success that I think about, build a timeline for yourself. As Siobhan said, give yourself weeks, not days, to complete. There is a reason that funding applications open sometimes 8 weeks before a closing date, because you need it, and you should use them. Copy out all of the questions. This is what I do. I kind of make a list on a page, and then I try and populate are there phrases in documents or data or topics that I should put in particular places. And then identify what you don't know, so you have time to research, which again was what Pauline and Siobhan said. I set a goal to have the form complete well in advance. So then because there'll always be the person who gets sick, or the computer breaking down, or the whatever, the things that stop you getting to the finishing line. So again, building in all that time. Ensure if it's an online or a physical printed delivery, and give yourself time, because if you have to go somewhere with it and print it out, and as we said, the printer ink going, or is it just a kind of an upload? But uploads take time. Who else is involved? Get agreements, MOUs or memorandums of understanding. If there's kind of multiple organizations being involved, you might write a little document to say, here's the basic things that we agree of each other, expectations, the levels of support in place well in advance, and then building in the time. So my top tips are, well, as Mary said, you can't receive both the Arts Grant and the ArtsLink bursaries for the same project, so keep an eye on that. All supplementary material must be clearly labelled as yours, whether that's a kind of a physical or attachment documents. So read their guidelines about how they want things labelled, and don't just upload the thing that you have without checking that whether you need to relabel it. And I loved Siobhan's suggestion of a contents list. I love a contents list. When you open an envelope, it really shows professionalism that you've taken the extra time to just clearly show them what's in the envelope. Because actually, if they want to read the budget first, where can they find that? That's in the third piece of, the third folder or the third document. Identify your previous awards just to prove your experience, back to this notion of I'm a safe investment, I'm a safe pair of hands. I've done projects of this scale before. Have someone in your support team who can help you with the technical queries. So a bit like when I make the document and I put in 10 images, suddenly it's 25 megs and it needs to be 10. Who can help you with sizing images, reducing file sizes, that sort of thing? I mean, I'd be terrible at that, but I know somebody who can help. These are competitive awards, as I said before. It's a finite funding pot, and it's always assumed that the number and the quality of applicants will rise every year. It's a competition. Now, both Siobhan and Pauline talked about evaluation and measurement. And in a way, they're two different things. So I can measure things because I can count them, but I can evaluate them based on the impact or the change that they made. So for me, this is about outcomes versus outputs. So I might do a project and my output is an exhibition and a book and 3 workshops, but the outcomes might be that 10 people in direct provision who weren't, who had no engagement with the community are now participating in, XYZ or doing a thing. So the outcomes are, in a sense, the changes that you made in the world. And they don't have to be grand outputs where suddenly, society changes. They can be micro outcomes, but this is where you need to observe. And Siobhan talked about keeping a note of the emails that you get. I always advise artists to have a notebook in their pocket, and when they're chatting to people on the day and somebody says a great thing, write it down, because you won't remember it in 2 days' time, the specific thing that they said. So, that qualitative feedback is really important. And those are great things to either tell the arts office in a meeting afterwards, or when you meet the local councillor. And you can talk about talking to the parent, and they were saying that their kid is really struggling in school, and actually participating in this art activity has really brought them out of themselves, and they're starting to paint, write, whatever. This is really important stories to record and to be able to feedback. So plan in advance how you're going to measure and record that stuff, because they'll want to know afterwards that you can tell them that their investment was well spent. So will my investment be professionally managed in terms of kind of financially and spent on the things I want it to be spent on? And will it be well spent, as in there will be, a benefit for the council, the community, whatever. And ensure you do ongoing stakeholder engagement outside of the funding opportunities. Like, don't leave it till the time you need a huge investment to the first time that anybody's ever going to hear from you. Keep in contact. If you have exhibitions or events, put the relevant people on mailing list. And it's not just the person at the head of the arts office. Think about other people in the organization that might be relevant, because people move, people get ill, and people aren't in the week that you want them to do the thing. So stakeholder engagement is really important. So strengths, weaknesses, values. Consider your strengths. I talked about this a little bit earlier. How can you accentuate these in your application? So if I'm great at community engagement at workshops, maybe I should build that into my project. But also be honest with yourselves about weaknesses. What are you not good at? What can you recruit to support you in that area? And we talked about tech. Languages are, an interesting thing as well. I'm not brilliant at project management, and I know the council has seen that before, because I was a bit late delivering that thing the last time. So actually I can tell them in advance that I've recruited somebody who's an expert in project management to support on that side of things. So again, you're constantly mitigating potential areas of risk or places where they're going to ask a question. Over time, identify and keep note of the values that you bring to your work. I think this is really important, and observe the values that you see in others, because these are really important when you're thinking about relationships or collaborations or partnerships for your project. So for me, I'm a real attention to detail stickler. So I'm never going to want to work with someone who sends me slapdash documents, or I see on their poster spelling mistakes. Like, that would just make me crazy. So I'm going to be looking for someone who has an excellent approach, who has attention to detail, who is really focused on duty of care of the audience, you know, whatever. Like, don't risk your reputation. Find collaborators who think the same way you do. And then audience development. Think about who your audience are and how you're going to engage with them. And you should make it clear in your application who your target is. And then what will be the benefits to Kilkenny, whether that's societal, community, artistic benefits, economic benefits. Diversity and inclusion is a really important thing. Ensure that you're building this in your planning, and show how you're going to sort of strive to ensure all of the audience can participate equally. And this, I mean, you notice at the start of this session that I introduced myself through an audio or a visual description, just in case you couldn't see me. And I've set up, hopefully you see them, I've got my thing covered, but hopefully you can see captions of what I'm saying as well. So think about inclusion. Like, if a percentage of your community, and you know that there's a percentage of your community who maybe aren't from Ireland, consider things like language, the relevance of the subject matter. What are the things that I can do to ensure that I can engage everybody in the community? So am I going to create workshops in advance that helps people get interested and engage, and maybe trains them to become a volunteer on my project? Am I going to maybe get some translation done of the poster or the brochure, so that the Chinese community or the Polish community can participate on an equal level? Am I going to choose a venue or involve a space in my project that isn't accessible to maybe people with mobility issues? Is the venue that I'm selecting for my event, do I know that it has racist policies like anti-traveller access policies? Like, those things are really important to know and ensure that you're mitigating against, particularly if that community, because you want all communities to be welcome in your event. So ensure that equal access is available. If your piece has a really strong sound element and audio track, could you create, well, obviously if it's a video piece, you need to make sure the captions are available. Could you have a written description or a written transcription of what's in it? If it's a visual piece, could you go an extra mile and spend a little bit of time creating a visual description of the images? When you're uploading images to social media, add alt tags and all that sort of stuff. So I think diversity and inclusion is going to be really important. And if you are, describe how you're going to develop the art form, or develop the artists involved, or develop the audience. So these are key ambitions specifically in applying to the Arts Council. So they'll want to know how you're thinking about those things. So describe those unintended, so intended or expected outcomes. So I'm going to be developing knowledge of the arts in this community, or I'm going to develop the appreciation of art in this community, or I'm going to improve the standard of art or of this particular art form. So think about those things. Budgeting. What other resources are available or have you secured? You should include this, particularly arts grants and arts links, because they have a minimum matched funding that needs to be involved. So it might be, if you're asking for £2,000, that you need to show that there's €200 available from somewhere else, or even in your time, or that you're giving office space or something towards the project. Complete the budget sheet in full. Have you accounted for your own time? I think this is really important. Particularly at the moment, they'll want to see that the artist's time is being recognised, and if any of it's unbalanced. So as Siobhan said, they need to, your income and your outgoings need to match. So how would a layperson read that budget? Ask a few dispassionate observers to have a look. And does it make sense? Does it tell the story, as Siobhan said? Budget for your in-kind income and your expenditure. And so private income is your own resources, so the stuff that you're putting to the project. So that may be that you're using your space as an office for the group, or you're going to, some of the materials you're donating, something like that. And then earned income is the things that will bring income to the project. So it might be ticket sales or art sales or programs or advertising or something like that. And then break down your artist fees into the project costs. So this is the layout of, I think it's the arts grants one. You'll see on the income, you've got private, earned, in kind, other income, on the expenditure side, things like marketing and publicity, overheads, travel, and try and keep that expenditure even. Like if there's a real outlier in one space and there's no explanation as to why the marketing and publicity is enormous, like you need to make it clear why things might look unbalanced if they are for any reason. And it might be that, you know, for a particular part of the performance or the event, you need to purchase something that's overly expensive. And your supporting information, include the list of your supporting documents. Rather than several supporting documents, can they be amalgamated, as we said before, with a clear narrative? So explain clearly who you are, what your expertise is, identify everyone involved and their expertise. So that might be through CVs or biographies, selecting a small number of strong, recent and relevant. I think recent is the really important one. Don't be putting images up from 15 years ago, because that'll ask questions if it's not clear what you've been doing recently. Is there a clear timeline and is it credible? Have I edited judiciously? No more than 6 links usually for things like YouTube and Vimeo. And is the work recent? And then in delivering your project, I'm a big believer in the stakeholder engagement piece, because again, back to you proving that you're responsibly looking after the investment, keep in contact with the funder and the key stakeholders. So particularly if anything changes in terms of the circumstances, if there's going to be a delay or something has to change, tell them first, just so that they're abreast, because you don't want them hearing it from someone else. Keep copies of everything for your funders. So I think it's really nice to surprise them with a kind of really strong archival material afterwards, or little keepsakes. And then if you intend a long-term relationship with those funders, do keep in contact, update them regularly, add them to your mailing list, meet with them every year or so, because you don't want to surprise them if you have a really big idea at some point in the future and you've been utterly absent on the landscape. And then your funder isn't just the person who sends you the letter. A local authority is made up of executive and elected officials, so know who people are and stay connected. I had a client once who got funding year in, year out from the arts office, and basically sent the same application every year. And one particular year, the arts officer was on sick leave, so it was strangers in the room, most of whom were from the council. And they read the application and they were like, oh, well, it's a small amount of money. And sure, look, they could probably pick that up elsewhere. There are other things that are important, and cut their funding by 100% because they didn't know the organization. They'd never heard of it. And it was devastating, because it was although it was a small amount of money, it was pretty much the main thing that was keeping them going. So it's really important that you have relationships across. And that doesn't need to be, you know, I'm on speaking terms, just that hopefully they know about you. So whether that's regular stuff in the media, sending them newsletters, sending them invitations, so that when they open your application, that you're not a stranger to them. And then writing the kind of follow-up stuff. Show clearly how the money was spent. Include high quality documentation of the project. This is not a photograph of your computer with the thing happening on the computer. If necessary, build in funds for a professional photographer, videographer, whatever, or someone who knows what they're doing to help you with those things, because you've got to tell the story of what happened. And I think it's intended and unintended outcomes are really, so again, those little stories of the thing that happened that sort of changed the game for everybody. Citations then from stakeholders, artists, collaborators, audience members. Siobhan talked about surveys or questionnaires, or keeping those emails that popped in afterwards. Talk about how you credited them and showcase the funders, and hopefully you've done that in kind of clever and innovative ways, and it's not just, oh, we stuck the logo at the end of the thing and actually it was a bit faded because I didn't have a good logo and I photocopied it. Like respect everybody's brand as well as your own, and use logos in professional ways, I think I would say. Talk about how you implemented those policies that you had to, and then include quantitative and qualitative information. So if you think about quantities, things that you can measure as numbers, and quality, that's the kind of feedback, the stories, the things that happened, the changes that were made. So you can show how you described or how you measured and evaluated and described the outputs. So that is everything from me. So hopefully we have some questions. I'm going to...
Rowena, before we go to questions, can I just make some observations on what people have been talking about this morning? I'll be really quick.
Yep.
I may hop around a bit, but just things that came up listening to people, things that
Brilliant.
I have found in receiving funding applications is unresolved proposals. So for example, we get people looking for funding to make a short film or to publish a short collection of poems, but they don't give us any information on how this is going to be distributed. You know, how is it going to get out there into the world? So even mentioning, you know, short film festivals or something like that you're going to approach. Similarly, how are you going to get your small publication out there? So that's one that often kind of comes along. The other thing then is just to mention that a lot of what we've spoken about this morning is about sharing projects, which is what I just mentioned, involving communities. Remember, our ArtLinks projects are not about that. We also fund from a professional development perspective, and your work as an artist and your development as an artist is critically important to us. I worked in the UK for a long time, and social inclusion became a big buzzword in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s. And I saw artists getting penalized. The quality of their work was brilliant, but it didn't have a socially inclusive aspect to it, and they didn't get funded. I don't see that as the right thing. They weren't applying to the wrong fund either. So some funds will look for social inclusion and community engagement. Some funds are professional development. Some funds are for you as an artist to develop your practice, particularly at the moment, things like the Platform 31 that I mentioned, which is for mid-career artists. This is about, particularly during COVID time, enabling artists to go into their studios, spend time on their work and do their research. Because I will always say, without that opportunity and time for artists, in the long run, our communities suffer anyway because of the quality of work. I made a couple of other notes here. From the point of view technical know-how, if there are issues out there with technical know-how, if people need to know how to compress PDFs, maybe take better photographs, this is the sort of information we want to see in the evaluation, because if we know what your needs are, we will do what we can to meet those needs. So there's no point in me running a seminar on something that you don't need, whereas, you know, we just did a 7-week course on digital skills, which got tremendous feedback, particularly at the moment, people documenting, making short films, all on their phones. So if there are other technical areas where there's a shortfall, if there is enough numbers, let us know, and we will try to adhere to that as well. Reporting photographs, limit the number of photographs you send us. Don't send us 40 photographs that are okay. Send us 3 photographs that are really high quality, because in actual fact, we can use those photographs in upcoming reports, you know, in strategies, in county development plans. I do a report every single month for our chief executive. So give us good quality photographs. You know, we've gotten good quality photographs before and they've ended up in strategies. The other thing is your fees. Obviously, the artist fee is really important. If we don't encourage this, but if there's anything in kind from the point of view of your fee, I remember years ago making a funding application personally as an artist, and I told them what my fee was, but I gave 50% of that fee in kind, or 25%, I can't remember. So they could see the real value of the project, but I was in a position to give some of my time as in kind, but I didn't lower my fee for them. I told them what my fee was, and I mentioned the fact that I was giving X amount of hours in kind, or a percentage, I think. The other thing is, adhering to the guidelines. From the point of view of being sticking to how many examples, how many pages, the sizes of your PDFs, it has actually come to the stage in the last 2 or 3 years for funding applicants, and not just Kilkenny County Council do this, a lot of councils do, and so do the Arts Council. If they ask for 3 examples and you give 4, they won't actually even bother looking at the 4th, so don't give it. If they ask for a PDF with a maximum of 10 megabytes, we now actually state that if it doesn't come in that format, we won't assess it, because it's part of our criteria. So, you know, like we've asked for 10 megabyte PDFs in the past, and people have sent us, like, and I'm not exaggerating, 15 separate PDFs. We cannot keep track of that sort of stuff with loads of other applications coming in. And also you're putting loads of work on yourself. So I think that was it, just things that struck me as the various conversations were coming up. So Rowena, I'll hand back to you now for
Thanks
questions.
a million. That's really useful. Anyone asking about the recording? Yes, I will hopefully be able to send this massive file to Mary and it'll exist, because certainly the advice would be that anybody who is applying in the future should be able to tick the box to say that they have watched it. There was some discussion in the chat about mentors, which is great and really useful. I mean, in terms of that question, the original question, who can I talk to about my ideas and my projects? Mary, it would be good to know if that's something that the Arts Council offer, in terms of if someone is kind of thinking like, okay, I've thought this through, I'm not sure, where it might be relevant. Would you be able to have the capacity to support a conversation?
We do when we can. The capacity can be difficult, and it depends as to the level of how much support somebody needs. But I would also always advise before you write a funding application, if you're not sure if it fits or fulfills the criteria, absolutely a call. Well, I would actually say not a call, an email. You're much more likely to get a response from an email because just time. We're often in meetings. You can email Deirdre. Deirdre will have a look at it, and then she passes things on to me, or we discuss it together. The other thing I came across recently is somebody was applying to the Arts Council for something and asked me for a letter of support, and I kind of thought, I just asked them which fund they were applying to, and I advised that I didn't think it was the appropriate fund and to ring the Arts Council, and they were quite surprised from the point of view of can I, and I'm like, yeah, they're just other people. This is why I like doing these things, so people, if they don't know me, that they get a chance to put a face to the name, and they know that they can email me and say, is this suitable? And that person did call the Arts Council, and he was applying to a fund that was less appropriate, and he was put on to the most appropriate fund for his particular. Now the Arts Council is different, they've got more funds than us. So I would say that. The other piece of advice somebody gave me once is, once you've written your application, he recommended always give it to a primary school teacher. If you know primary school teacher, give it to them. They're used to getting across information very clearly, but in a very accessible way. So primary, probably secondary school teacher, but apparently teachers are really good for that as well.
Yeah.
So I would say absolutely. And if we can't help, we can pass you on to somebody else, hopefully, who can. Obviously, we have a limited capacity as well.
And I think, on the original question, it might be too early to talk to a potential funder, and you might actually just want advice on how to structure and how to support, and does this sound like something that could turn into a project? So I would have a look around and think about who you admire, who does work that's a bit like this, and approach them. And it doesn't have to be, it can be an overwhelming thing to be asked, will you be my mentor? Because you're thinking, well, what does that mean? It might just be, could I have a cup of coffee at some point? Because I'd love to talk to you about an idea, and I'm not really sure how to start or how to continue. And most people are pretty, and don't ask for help for someone you don't know. Reach out first and develop a dialogue and an engagement before you suddenly ask for huge amounts of their time. So predispose people, hopefully find a way to let them know where your work is and what you're doing before you kind of jump in on the big ask. But if you can identify a mentor or a fund for a mentor, and then you can identify someone who's really who you really think could help to grow your practice, because at the end of the day, you don't want someone who's just going to have coffee with you and shoot the breeze. If you want to move to the next level on things, you want someone who has kind of got there and who can support you. Or a coach as well is kind of a slightly different thing. A mentor will kind of show you how to do it. A coach will just help you to have a kind of a dialogue with yourself about what those dreams and ambitions are, and help you to find the way, as opposed to telling you the way, if that makes sense.
Draw it out of you.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there can be funds to pay mentors. Coaches you usually have to pay. There was a few questions about artist fees and how people estimate a work, or what it should be in terms of the percentage of the project. And I know certainly our three speakers are all working artists, and I don't know if they have an approach that they would put into it. And I know certainly in the chat, lots of people have been suggesting other resources online, which is brilliant. Keep those suggestions coming in terms of places that you can find facts and figures. Mary, do you have a kind of an institutional approach to that in terms of what you expect to see?
We would generally look at, I suppose part of that is based on the panel that we would pull together. We would look for somebody, you know, with curatorial experience from the point of view of visual artists. But we also, the VAI have, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a theorem around artist fees and paying artists. So generally when I put panels together, we put panels together with different backgrounds, do you know what I mean, theatre and literature, and would rely on them. And I suppose just our own experience as well. We have done workshops before on artists paying themselves and how to budget for, you know, working from home and dividing that up. So if it's something that people think might be useful, we can look at maybe doing a session on that helps people. And I know it's different across different art forms as well, but I would recommend contacting, you know, Theatre Forum, the VAI, and different kind of national resource organisation, maybe the Irish Writers' Centre as well, because fees are different depending on people's experience. But we know what we pay other people, I'll put it like that, you know what I mean? We know what we're paying our mentors, and we know what we pay our workshop facilitators for visual arts. So we would really base it on what we pay people.
Yeah.
Which is generally an hourly rate.
And my sense would be that not everyone involved in a project needs to be paid. Like if you're employing an artist, fine. But if it's a community group and you're, I don't know, creating events in the community, then that's maybe, I don't want to use the word amateur, but it's an approach that maybe you're not necessarily employing a professional artist who needs to be paid. So you can notate that. There was a question about estimating art sales in advance. I certainly wouldn't be putting all my eggs in that basket in terms of income, because it can be hard. And Pauline, do you have a useful thought on that?
Well, I make work that costs me money and it's not commercial.
Right.
So, you know, it's not item based, and more, and I'm not very technical. So more and more, you know, I have to hire a cameraman, or, you know, and I firmly believe in hiring the professionals who are expert at their job. I will say that from the beginning, even though I have a photography second major, whatever they call it, but it's analog. So it's very hard when it's your project, for instance, and then you have to document it as well. There's just too many hats to wear. So get a friend, there's a bartering or something like that, who is good at it. So you don't have to exchange fees. Regarding fees, with it's slightly changed. The Ivoro on the VAI website is fantastic. It gives you early career, mid-career, or, you know, well-established fees for days, curating, selecting, all of that. But with regard, let's say, to a public art commission, there was a rule of thumb. It can slightly deviate. It's a third, and a third. So a third materials, a third production, and a third fee. Now that could come down to 25%. So materials, for instance, could be, you know, let's say if I'm traveling the country, it could be travel, could be accommodation, it could be all those things. But it is essential, and it would be viewed incorrect, let's say negatively, if an artist didn't put in their own fee. It shows a professionalism there. But I think that's it. I'll say. I mean, I make books too. I generally give them for free. I give them away to those co-curators, co-creators that I've worked with too. So that's not commercial either. So.
To circle back around to that question, Mary, about estimating art sales. I mean, I think you could do a little bit of work in advance in terms of predisposing people. So, I mean, if you had people you knew in your family or in your network who maybe were going to buy a piece, that you could kind of have a little guess of what you know, I know it's going to be a minimum of this, that these 3 pieces are potentially going to sell. So I'll know that, but don't be saying we're going to sell everything if that's not a reasonable point of view. I mean, if you were Patrick Scott or Lula Brockie, you could probably guess that you'd sell most of it. But if you're emerging and you haven't tested the market, that might be a challenging thing. Mary, what would be your point of view on that?
Yeah, I would base it on previous sales, let's say, because if you're going to estimate your sales and you've got a panel looking at sales, but you haven't said what you're basing that estimate on, if it's given a context, then at least the panel could kind of go, okay, so this person has a track record, they generally sell whatever 50%, and you know, they're more likely to take a punt on that, let's say. So because it's grounded in something. So a lot of it is about giving context to your claims in a way. Do you know what I mean? So I would base it on that, on sort of previous sales or previous experiences. But I wouldn't, as you said in the beginning, Rowena, really rely on that, let's say, for income.
Yeah. Thanks, and I hope that answers the question. We had a really great question, and thank you for it, about artists suffering from dyslexia and who struggle with writing. And thanks for that question, because I think it's a really important thing to talk about. I have noticed that the Arts Council have a pull-out box in most of their funding applications about disabled artists. Now, I apologise if you don't identify as disabled, but you know, on the sort of the spectrum of disabilities, certainly things like dyslexia would qualify, and you could identify yourself if you felt able to just to ensure that the readers know that and take that into account, and that it's not a sort of a sloppy approach. And the other thing you can do, obviously, is have people in your network who will help you and read documents for you. Yeah, I think it's just to sort of take a little bit of the pressure off yourself to kind of ask for help, or just to identify, even in one of the questions, just to very quickly acknowledge it, so the reader can, you know, take that into account. I also know that some other funding bodies, like the Social Entrepreneurs, their guidance to their readers is specifically not to take anything or not to guard against internal bias and unconscious or unconscious bias when they're reading, in terms of the quality of the writing, because lots of people who would be applying might have challenges or be neurodiverse, and not to use that as a way to mark people down. So you could find out about that.
And from the Arts Office point of view, I mean, obviously we don't have those sorts of facilities. We don't even have a system set up as of yet. The Arts Office it's not our responsibility to do that, but I have been in discussion with the people whose responsibility it is for quite some time, to see if we can get an efficient system set up, and presumably we can look at that then. So from our perspective, I would say, let us know. You know, we're a very small department. There's myself and Deirdre, and we have Bernadette with us part-time. So just email us and let us know. I feel, you know, attention to detail is quite important to me. And if you're somebody who I suppose is challenged by that from the point of view of dyslexia, please just let us know, you know, and then at least, you know, we have a context for your application.
Yeah, I hope that's useful. Deirdre, is there any questions that we might have missed that you spotted?
Sorry there. Yeah, there's a few questions about what you mean by good quality photos. I think when Mary, you were explaining about sending.
Yeah,
photos.
I think Pauline talked to that a little bit, in terms of, you know, find somebody who's really good. Always use professional photography rather than kind of depending on yourself or your mate with their phone. Mary, do you have another point of view on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, not everybody can afford professional photographers. So I would say it's quite easy to look up online, actually, taking professional photographs. And in actual fact, you know, food photography is really big, but there's a really simple way. I've done it myself in the past, where you can make up a small portable box. Now it's disposable, you can recycle it, but it's based on, you know, kind of how you shape your white paper, and it just gives a really good background for your work. They're all photographed in the same light. They're all photographed from the same distance. So Google can be incredibly helpful when it comes to things like that, because sometimes it's simplicity. It's not leaning your photograph or your painting or your sculpture up against a busy background or something where there's a window or the light's coming from the wrong side. That actually can be quite easily researched, particularly now. And phones do actually take really good quality. I mean, my phone is better quality photographs than any camera I ever had in the past. You know what I mean? It's bizarre. But I would say look up some simple techniques, and they do exist out there. And it's really standardizing your photographs from the point of view of us actually being able to see the work. And one thing that Pauline said that is really important is underneath the photograph, particularly if your work is a little bit more conceptual or it relies on video or human interaction, give us the context for that image right underneath it, you know what I mean? So we know what we're looking at and we know how it relates to your proposals or your statement or your work.
Yeah, great. Anything else, Deirdre?
No, that was just people are sending in their emails there.
Yeah.
Just
I would suggest everybody kind of copy and paste, and Karen has very cleverly grabbed them all together. Yeah, so rather than us for GDPR reasons being able to share them afterwards, do a quick kind of either copy and paste or screen grab, just so you can kind of get those addresses. And that's great advice, Kate, that you can rent SLR cameras. Yeah, I mean, if you're having an event where there's people, don't think that a photograph of 10 people in a line against a wall is a useful representation of that. Somebody who actually is used to taking photographs will understand how to take kind of action shots that really clearly show what's happening. And that's not something that you can kind of you pick up naturally, I think. But yeah, the cameras now, I mean, my camera has an amazing setting where you can, the person in the foreground is beautifully clear, but the background isn't, or vice versa. It can be very, very beautifully done. I'm conscious of time, and thanks everybody for all of the contributions, and specifically to our speakers. Thank you. There was a huge amount of prep that went into that. Mary, I'm going to hand over to you for the sort of the final wrap up and reflection.
Okay. Yeah, I will keep it very brief. Absolutely delighted to see so many people here, and I hope the session has been helpful. And I think my reading of the presentations from Siobhan and Pauline and all of your incredible input, Pauline, Rowena, is that we did cover quite a lot of things, because in actual fact there weren't as many questions as maybe I had expected. Orla Tracy, your question didn't get answered. I'll come back to you on the digital course. The only other thing I will say is the evaluation. We do have an evaluation form, and I would really stress how important it is for you to complete that. We don't do evaluation forms to drag things out and to make things even more painful for you, but we would really like you to reflect on today's session, because in actual fact, we do genuinely use that information to design future projects and events and webinars and whatever for you. So if we know what you need, if we know what your experience was like, if we know where it was lacking, and if we know sort of where your other interests lie or where the shortcomings are, that's where we get that information. So, you know, we will collate all of that, and we work directly from that when it comes to designing further events. So I don't really have anything else to add, just to thank everybody for coming. Really hope it was helpful. We do have it recorded, so people will be able to hark back to it to remind themselves of what was brought up, and to have a good look at the advice that was given. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
That was excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. Well done.
Thanks, Rowena and Mary, and lovely to hear from you, Siobhan. Okay.
Pauline, for everything. You're brilliant.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks a million. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.